Well, good afternoon or good evening, whichever it happens to be for you. Today, we are here back to our series about the attributes of God. Took a break for a couple of days. Just had a conversation with my brothers and was at together for the gospel last week and sort of reflecting on some of the talks that I was hearing regarding pastoral ministry and other such things. But did want to come back to our series, going through all these different attributes of God, and just thinking about who he is and his character and how he works. So one of the things that we were going to talk about today is the providence of God. It's one of those implications. It's not necessarily it's an implication of his power, knowledge, and creatorness. So God being the creator, God being all powerful, God being all knowing, has this expression in his providence. And we'll kind of be exploring different aspects of his providence this week. We may even touch on the problem of evil later. But for now, what we're going to touch on is just how him being the creator of all things from the very beginning knows the end from the very beginning. So to start off, I thought this would be good to go to a confession of faith that I, for the most part, would subscribe to. The 1689 London Baptist Confession says this about the providence of God. God, the good creator of all things, in his infinite power and wisdom, does uphold, direct, dispose, and govern all creatures and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, to the end for which they were created, according unto his infallible foreknowledge, in the free and immutable counsel of his will, the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, infinite goodness, and mercy. All right, well, I know that's a mouthful, but in this, it's described that God is our creator of all things. We're told, for example, in Hebrews 1:3 about Jesus, he is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and upholds the universe by the word of his power. And having made purifications for sin, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high. The key part is that beginning there that I want to kind of touch on, that is related to his providence. Jesus is the radiance, the glory of God. And not only did he create nature, he also uphold natures. Jesus, even to this day, is consistently and forever upholding it the way that he would see fit. And also, so we're told in the 1689, God's the creator of all good things, and he's got all power and wisdom, and he's upholding creation. That's what Hebrews 1:3 is about. Isaiah 46:10 says, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things yet not done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. So in other words, anything that God wants to happen, happens. If God has providentially and from the beginning decreed something to pass, it passes. And so, and we're also told that he governs all creatures. In other words, there's nothing that escapes his grasp of power. So God is the creator of all things. He has the power over everything. He even upholds it to the very last molecule. And there's nothing that falls underneath his grasp. For example, we're told in Matthew 10:29-31, that God even knows the numbers of the hair on your head, even when a sparrow falls, and that God is in control over everything. So the thought is, God is all powerful, God is all knowing, he's present everywhere. And if he has decreed it from the very beginning, if he has willed it from the very beginning, it will be done. And so whatever happens, whatever he has created, it's going to fulfill the purpose for which they were created, is what we're told in the 1689, which is, in this case, according to his infallible foreknowledge and free counsel. So, in other words, God foreknows from the very beginning what will happen. One of the hardest things to think about when we start thinking about God is that he is outside of time and space. Um, we are so locked in step with time, it is sort of hard to take a step back and to think about being outside of time. God is outside of time, and since he is, he knows the very end from the beginning. And he's infallible. He's never wrong about what's going to happen in the future. So, for example, this is why God is never wrong in his prophecies and never doubles back on his promises, because he knows it will happen, because that's who he is. He has that perfect, infallible foreknowledge. But not only that, he also has an unchanging counsel. Basically, once God has made up his mind, it will happen. We're told in the book of Numbers, for example, that God is not a man that he should change his mind. So God doesn't change his mind. So if God has decided it and fixed it from eternity past, it will come about to pass. So, in other words, God, from the very beginning, when he made the earth and everything in it, number one, he made it, so he's in charge because of that. Number two, he has given it a history and an end. So in other words, God has planned out all of human history, all everything that we know. God has his hand in. There's nothing that surprises God. So um, this should be kind of a comforting thought for us, even when we go through trials. For example, we go through trials, we can know that God has a plan and a purpose for our trial. It's not like there's any randomness in what happens underneath God's providence. So there's no random molecule. There's no stray molecule, as has been said, related to God's providence. And also, he upholds it. So, for example, like the laws of nature, who made them? Well, of course, God did, and we understand him as best we can, even applying our sciences. But even to this day, we don't totally understand the universe and how it works, but God does. And if he stopped upholding it, it would unravel. C.S. Lewis kind of had an interesting thought on this. He actually his thought was that for the regularity that we often experience in the natural order, and he was like, well, that some people think that means that God's not really all that involved. He created things, and now he's taken a step back, and now he's not all that engaged with the daily happenings. But he makes an interesting observation. He thinks about infants. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have been around babies lately, but I have some young nieces and nephews, and one of their favorite things to do is to have you do the same thing over and over and over again. Like there's some nephews and nieces, I'd just be flipping circles, and they thought I was great. I had to keep flipping them circles. They wanted me to keep on doing it. They kept wanting me to do the same thing, do it again, do it again, do it again, and they weren't the ones that got tired of enjoying that same thing. I was the one who'd probably get frustrated in with that because I'm old. Um, and so what Lewis observes in all of this is that perhaps God has a similar appetite to rejoice in the monotony. It's not that God is not involved anymore. He's made everything operate according to the same principles, is now really not all that engaged, but he's never got tired of telling the sun, do it again, in the sense of it rising. And he's never got tired of painting a sunset at night. God enjoys doing those same things, even in creation. And so he upholds it, and he is the one who keeps it going. So not only did God make it, he keeps it going, and he has a history and a plan for what is going to go on in creation. So why? What's kind of the end for which God created the world and God created all things? Well, 1689 reminds us, and I think this is a good reminder. It's why did God do this? It's to the praise of the glory of his wisdom, of his power, his justice, his goodness, and his mercy. Um, so the end for which God created the world, simply put, is God himself. And because God is the highest end that could ever be. He's pure being. As we've been going throughout this series, hopefully you've discovered that God is the best being ever. There could be nothing greater. And for that, and for God to design creation and ourselves for that would be a great thing. And so wherever reason that God does what he does, it's according to his own pleasure, and he's free to do whatever it is that he wishes. So a couple of applications for you today. Number one, it should bring, as I mentioned earlier, it should bring you comfort in trial. When we experience those difficulties, could be the pandemic, it could be something else going on in life, we can know that God's got a plan. It's not that there's a stray molecule in existence. But it also could remind us, I think it's another way to remind us, is just our daily dependence upon God. If God stopped being in control of the universe, things would fall apart at the seams. And so we should every day be mindful of who God is and what he's doing. And thirdly, we can be praying and asking God, as we're kind of going throughout our lives, to think about what it is that he would have for us that day. God's already ordered our days, and so what does he have us for that day, helping us to live according to the counsel of his will. So just some encouragement for you today. We're going to keep thinking through God's providence, but just wanted to kind of introduce you to the subject today, and I hope you enjoyed today's video.